On the evening of July 4th, 2025, a man I'm calling Mike was sitting in a camping chair outside of his RV in the Sequoia National Forest. He was enjoying the quiet. Beside him was his wife, Sarah, and laying at their feet were their two dogs. The couple had driven out to the Fairview campground from Bakersfield to get away from the city for the 4th of July weekend. Specifically, they wanted to get their dogs away from the constant noise of the fireworks. And so far, the plan had worked perfectly. Even though the campground was totally full, it was really peaceful. The only sounds were the gentle rush of the Kern River nearby and the quiet laughter from the other campsites scattered through the trees. It was a beautiful, clear night. A big three-quarter moon was hanging in the sky, lighting up the valley that was nestled between these huge, dark mountain ridges. Mike and Sarah were just talking quietly, enjoying the cool desert air, when suddenly Sarah stopped mid sentence. She held up a hand and said, "Shh, you hear that?" Mike listened, and at first all he could hear was the river, but then he heard it too. It was a long, low, moaning howl that seemed to be echoing down from the mountains. It was so far away it was hard to place, but it was definitely there. Sarah, who by nature was very skeptical, immediately tried to find a logical explanation. She turned to Mike and said, "Is that a train? It kind of sounds like a train horn." But Mike just shook his head. He knew this area well, and there were no train tracks anywhere for miles. He told her, "No, it can't be a train." The sound faded, and for a few minutes it was just quiet again. Mike figured it was probably just a weird echo from another campsite or maybe some coyotes off in the distance. He didn't want to worry Sarah, so he just shrugged and went back to their conversation. But a few minutes later, the sound came again, except this time it wasn't a faint moan. It was a powerful guttural howl that seemed to be much closer. It vibrated in Mike's chest, and he saw the hair on his arm stand up. The two dogs who had been snoozing shot up to their feet, their ears perked, and they let out these low, nervous whines, pressing up against Mike and Sarah's legs. This was not a coyote. Mike's heart started pounding. He'd spent a lot of time on the internet and he'd gone down rabbit holes watching videos and listening to audio recordings of supposed Bigfoot encounters. And this sound, this howl, it was identical to some of the most famous recordings out there, like the Ohio howl. But he couldn't say that to Sarah. She would think he was crazy. So, trying to make light of a situation that was genuinely starting to freak him out, he forced a laugh and said, "Well, I guess it's just Bigfoot saying hi." Sarah didn't laugh. She just stared out into the darkness between the trees in the direction of the sound that it had come from. She was trying to rationalize it, to find some explanation that made sense, but she couldn't. And that was scarier than anything. They heard the howl at least three more times that night, each time followed by a long, eerie silence that just stretched on and on. They didn't see anything, but they both had this overwhelming feeling that they were being watched. Finally, they couldn't take it anymore. They called the dogs, scrambled inside the RV, and locked the door behind them. They spent the rest of the night peeking out of the windows, but they didn't hear or see anything else. The next day, Sunday, they packed up their RV, still feeling pretty shaken from the night before. On their way out of the campground, they stopped at the little general store next door, a place called McNally's. to grab a soda for the road. Mike happened to be wearing one of his favorite t shirts, a goofy one that had a picture of a gray alien and a Bigfoot sitting around a campfire together. As he went to pay, the storekeeper, an older guy, looked at his shirt and smiled. "I like your shirt," he said. Mike thanked him and they made some small talk. And then the shopkeeper leaned in a little closer and said, "You know, it's funny you're wearing that. Just the other night, I had a bunch of campers in here telling me they heard a Bigfoot up in the hills." Mike felt a chill go down his spine. He asked the shopkeeper, "You're kidding, right?" But the man shook his head. "Nope." Said it was the strangest howling they'd ever heard. Scared them half to death. "I didn't hear it myself. When the sun goes down, I go down." Mike was stunned. He paid for the sodas, thanked the shopkeeper, and hurried back to the RV. As soon as he got inside, he turned to Sarah and told her what the shopkeeper had said. And Sarah, the ultimate skeptic, her eyes went wide. She put her hand over her mouth and whispered, "I can't believe I heard a Bigfoot." The confirmation from a total stranger, the fact that other people had heard the exact same thing, it was all the proof she needed. For the entire drive home, that's all they could talk about. They were convinced they had a genuine encounter with a legendary creature. When they got back to their house in Bakersfield, the first thing Mike did was get on his computer. He wanted to find that audio recording, the Ohio How, to play it for Sarah. He pulled up the website, found the clip, and hit play. The exact same long, moaning, terrifying howl they had heard in the forest filled their living room. Sarah, who was standing in the kitchen, yelled out, "Oh my God, that's exactly what we heard." It would turn out the shopkeeper at McNally's had been telling the truth. Other campers had come into his store and told them they heard the Bigfoot. But what the shopkeeper had also told them, a detail that Mike didn't pick up on in his excitement, was that those campers had heard the sounds on Friday night. Mike and Sarah had heard the howls on Saturday night. What they had experienced wasn't a mythical beast stalking around the mountainsides. They were the victims of a holiday weekend prank. Some other campers had likely brought a speaker and were blasting recorded Bigfoot howls into the valley to mess with people. They did it on Friday and they did it on Saturday. Mike and Sarah, isolated and already a little on edge, heard the sounds and their imaginations did the rest, turning a simple prank into a terrifying encounter with the unknown. So it's not always something horrifying in the darkness. On the morning of May 18th, 2025, a father and his son parked their truck where Winchester Street dead ends at a set of railroad tracks in Monroe County, Michigan. It was a beautiful day, around 11:30 in the morning, and the two of them were about to head into the woods to do some bow fishing, something they did together all the time. They grabbed their gear, their dog happily trotting alongside them, and began walking down a familiar path to the Plum Creek. This area was a mix of swampy marsh and dense forest woven together by old railroad bridges. It was the kind of place that felt totally wild and remote, even though the constant hum of I-75 was just a few miles away. The father loved bringing his son out here. It was quiet, it was peaceful, and it was their time to just be together. They walked down the creek, crossing over four of the old railroad bridges, and then headed about 100 yards into the marsh. Their dog was running ahead of them, sniffing around, when suddenly it went rigid and started barking ferociously at a thicket of trees. A second later, the trees began to shake violently, like something huge was moving around in there. The father instinctively put a hand on his son's shoulder. His son looked up at him, his eyes wide. "What was that?" he whispered. The father, trying to stay calm, scanned the trees. "It's probably just a group of deer, son. The dog must have spooked them." It was a reasonable explanation. They were deep in the Michigan wilderness and deer were everywhere. The shaking stopped. The dog calmed down, and so they continued on, pushing another 200 yards deeper into the marsh until they reached a small creek basin. They sat there for a while, just enjoying the quiet and the wildlife, but eventually it was time to head back. They packed up their things and began to walk back, cutting through the tall cattails. As they were walking between the second and first railroad bridges, they heard the faint sound of sirens off in the distance. The sound grew louder, closer. His son turned to him. "Do you hear those?" he asked. The father nodded. "Probably a wreck on the I-75, he said. But he was curious. He put down his bow and arrow and pulled out his cell phone. "Let me see what's going on," he said, tapping on his police scanner app. He fumbled in his pack for his earbuds, wanting to listen in without spooking any wildlife that might be nearby. His son stood behind him, and the dog was off to their right, sniffing at something in the brush. The father was completely focused on his phone, trying to get the app to load, and it was in that moment of distraction that the peaceful afternoon was completely shattered. To their left, a loud rustling erupted from high up in a tree, followed by a huge, heavy thud that shook the ground. Something massive had just dropped from the branches. The father looked up from his phone and saw it. A huge, dark animal was crouched in the brush, and it was starting to move toward them. Before the father could even scream, his dog shot off from the right, a blur of fur and teeth charging straight for the creature. The creature, seeing the dog coming, moved with a speed that was just unnatural. It was impossibly fast, crashing through the brush and trees as it scrambled up a slope and over the train tracks with the dog hot on its heels. "Holy shit, what was that?" his son screamed, his voice crackling with terror. "It was as big as a bear, but it looked like a gorilla." The father, his heart hammering against his ribs, yelled for his dog to come back. He didn't want it tangling with whatever that thing was. To his relief, the dog obeyed and came trotting back, hackles still raised. They didn't wait around. The father grabbed his bow, and without another word, they turned and started speed walking back the way they came. But as they hurried away, they heard a distinct crunching sound on the ground behind them. Crunch, pause, crunch. It was following them. They didn't dare look back. They just broke into a run, not stopping until they burst out of the woods and were back under the safety of their truck. Once inside, with the doors locked, the father finally let himself breathe. He looked over at his son, who was pale and trembling. He had no idea what they had just seen, but he knew it wasn't a bear and it wasn't a deer. His son's description of a gorilla-like creature echoed in his mind. He thought about the old newspaper articles he'd heard about from the 1960s, stories of strange sightings and weird encounters in this very same part of the county. He had always dismissed them as local folklore. Now, he wasn't so sure. His hands were shaking. As he picked up his cell phone again, the police scanner app was finally open. He put the phone on speaker, and a dispatcher's voice crackled to life, filling the cab of the truck. And as the father and son listened, the story took a final, terrifying turn. The dispatcher wasn't talking about a traffic accident on the highway. She was coordinating a manhunt. A violent inmate had escaped from the Monroe County Jail that morning. The jail was located just behind the quarry, not far from where they had been fishing. The sirens they had heard were for him. The dispatcher gave a description of the man: powerfully built, over 6 feet tall, and considered extremely dangerous. It would turn out the creature in the woods wasn't a creature at all. It was a man, a desperate, dangerous man hiding in a tree, probably watching the police search for him. When the father and son had stopped to check the scanner, the fugitive must have seen his chance to move, but he made a noise and dropped to the ground, coming face to face with them. The dog had saved them, chasing him off before he could decide what to do with the two witnesses who had found his hiding spot. That crunching sound they had heard as they fled, that was him stalking them through the woods. The father clicked off the phone and looked at his son. The fear of the unknown monster was suddenly gone, replaced by the cold, sharp terror of a very real one. They had come face to face with the beast of Monroe County, but it wasn't a legend. It was a man, and he was still out there.
What do you think dogman is? Do you think it's supernatural or flesh and blood?
That's a slippery slope for some people. So, with my experience, I 100% believe that it was supernatural.
We just heard a rock clack right over here.